What would you do if an HOA hammered a giant sign into your land and claimed your entire lake overnight? I just wanted peace on the lake I bought and rebuilt with my own hands. But one morning, the HOA posted a sign on my land and screamed, "This lake belongs to us." From fake paperwork to late-night trespassers, things escalated fast. And then I uncovered the secret they'd been hiding for years. The morning air at the lake always had a different kind of quiet to it. Thicker, cleaner, almost heavy with the scent of pine and cold water rolling off the hills. That quiet was the reason I'd bought the place. It made the world feel slower, more honest. So when I stepped out onto my cabin porch at dawn, coffee in hand, and felt that peaceful stillness settling around me, I thought the day would begin like any other since I'd restored the lake. I walked down the wooden steps, the boards still damp from the night mist, and followed the familiar dirt path toward the restoration pumps near the shoreline. The sun had barely cracked the ridge line, lighting the lake in streaks of soft gold. The water looked glass flat, perfect enough that for a second, I forgot everything else. Then I saw it. At first, it didn't register as anything more than a shape. Dark, tall, planted into the ground like a dead tree. But as I got closer, my stomach tightened. A sign, big, metal, far too new for this property, stood crookedly in the dirt just a few feet from my private dock. A giant white rectangle stamped with bold block letters. HOA amenity. Authorized use only. My first thought was so simple it was stupid. That can't be right. My second thought tightened my throat. Someone trespassed onto my land to put this here. I stared at it for several seconds, my breath fogging lightly in the morning chill. I'd owned this lake outright. Every legal inch of it, purchased, restored, and documented. No HOA existed anywhere near my deed, and yet here this sign stood, hammered into my soil like I'd been annexed overnight. A low engine rumble made me turn. Outside my wrought iron front gate, large, black, and intentionally historic-looking, the unmistakable shape of a white HOA SUV sat parked at an angle along the gravel road. Headlights off, but engine running. Dust rose around the tires from the idling vibration. Standing in front of the gate, gripping the bars as if they personally offended her, was Bethany Reed. I didn't need the pink suit to give her away, but it certainly added theatrical flair. Bright, loud, aggressively pressed, she looked like a highlighter someone had sharpened too much, and her voice matched the color perfectly. "Remy Cole!" she screamed the moment she spotted me. "You need to step outside this gate now! You do not own this lake! We do!" The words cracked across the quiet morning like a gunshot. Two HOA enforcers, both wearing dark tactical-style vests that were far too dramatic for a homeowners association, stood slightly behind her. Hands on hips, not quite threatening, but absolutely prepared to look authoritative. They shifted their weight the way people do when they want you to know they're ready for something. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, halfway between my pumps and the dock, the cold breeze brushing past my jacket as my mind scrambled to catch up to the reality in front of me. My lake. My land. My deed. My restoration project. How could anyone show up claiming it belonged to them? I started walking toward the gate slowly, my boots crunching along the gravel. Bethany's eyes tracked me like a hawk watching prey. When I reached speaking distance, I leaned one forearm casually on the metal bar, more for stability than confidence. "What exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Do you think you're doing?" Bethany recoiled slightly, then snapped back into her posture, chin high, shoulders stiff. "This lake," she declared with unwavering certainty, "is under HOA jurisdiction. It has always been a shared community resource, and your attempt to claim exclusive ownership is a direct violation of neighborhood governance." I blinked once. "That sentence," I said slowly, contains at least 3 things that aren't true. Her nostrils flared. Oh, you think you're clever? You think you can talk your way out of this? You purchased improperly recorded land. You refurbished a body of water you had no right to control. And you have ignored repeated notices. What notices? I interrupted. I haven't received anything from any HOA, because I'm not part of one. Her painted lips curled. You are now. Behind her, one of the enforcers lifted a handheld device, some combination of a scanner and a camera, pointed at my gate, then at my driveway, and then at me. Bethany flicked her hand toward him with a command-like snap. Document violations. He nodded and began taking pictures of everything he could angle toward. Something hot pooled low in my stomach. Bethany, I said carefully, you need to remove that sign, get your people back in the SUV, and leave my property. This is not your jurisdiction. She laughed, a sharp, unpleasant break in the air. Oh, Remy, you poor, uninformed man, you really don't know what you've stepped into. Then she leaned forward, gripping the bars tighter. Open this gate, now, or we will exercise our authority and force entry. Rising anger pulsed through my chest, but I kept my face calm, unreadable. The lake behind me glimmered peacefully in the sunrise, completely unaware that a war had just been declared in its name. How, I asked again in a low voice, can they claim something I legally bought and rebuilt? Bethany's smile widened like she'd already won. Because we can, and because no one ever fights us and wins. As she said it, I noticed movement behind the SUV, another HOA officer pulling something from the trunk. A crowbar? No. Bolt cutters. My pulse kicked hard. Bethany lifted her chin triumphantly. Last chance, Remy. For the first time since stepping out onto my porch that morning, a flicker of doubt passed through my mind. Not fear, just a cold realization. These people were willing to go much further than anyone should, and they thought they could get away with it. But they hadn't met me yet. I didn't touch the gate. I didn't reach for the keypad. I just stood there, letting the cold morning air settle around us. Bethany, I said quietly, this isn't happening today. Her eyes sharpened, tiny lightning bolts of irritation. She snapped her fingers at the enforcer with the bolt cutters. Prepare for forced entry, she ordered. The man hesitated, just barely, glancing at the sheriff's SUV further down the road, like he wasn't entirely sure this was within his job description. But Bethany stepped aside, pointing dramatically at the latch like she was directing a movie scene. Before he could lift the cutters, my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I didn't look away from Bethany as I answered it. Mr. Cole, the voice on the other end said, this is Deputy Lewis. You called earlier about unauthorized activity on your road? I kept my tone steady. You're going to want to get back here, now. Bethany's expression twitched. She motioned her enforcers back, suddenly aware enough to know she shouldn't let a sheriff's deputy catch them mid-break-in. The cutters lowered. The tension thinned, but only slightly. She plastered on a stiff smile. We'll pause our entry. For now. Smart choice, I said. Her smile vanished. We'll return with proper authority, she snapped. And when we do, this gate will not stop us. She turned on her heel, her pink suit slicing through the morning fog as she stomped back toward her SUV. The two enforcers followed, glancing back at me like they still weren't sure if I was brave or just stupid. As the SUV backed up and rolled down the dirt road, dust curling behind it, I finally let out a slow breath. But the tension didn't leave, because I knew this wasn't over, not even close. And the worst part? This wasn't even our first encounter. My mind drifted back to the moment everything started, 4 days earlier. The day the binder showed up. It had been late afternoon. Warm sun, Still air, the kind of quiet that makes you think nothing bad can possibly happen. I'd been on the porch sorting through receipts from the restoration project when I heard tires crunch on gravel. A silver sedan, clean enough to look like it belonged in a dealership photo, pulled up to the gate. Out stepped Bethany Reed for the very first time. She strutted toward the gate like the property already belonged to her. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply lifted her chin and called out, "Are you Remy Cole?" I walked over, wiping dust from my hands. "That's me. Something wrong?" Without a word, she held up a bright red binder as if it were an ancient relic. "We need to discuss the conservation easement that governs this lake." "Conservation easement," I repeated. "I don't have one recorded on my deed." "Oh, you certainly do," she snapped. Then, with a smooth flourish, she slid several sheets against the bars of the gate like a magician doing a card trick. I took one look and knew it was fake. No state seal, no registration code, no timestamp, no witness signatures. Just a jumble of paragraphs formatted to look official enough to fool someone who wanted to believe her. I met her gaze evenly. "Bethany, this isn't a valid document." Her jaw tensed. The smile she attempted came out crooked. "It absolutely is. Our association has maintained authority over this land for decades." "That's impossible," I said. "My title search would have flagged any easement, historic or otherwise." She tapped the binder sharply. "Sometimes clerical errors occur. We're simply correcting them." I shook my head. "No, you're manufacturing them." Her lips thinned. "Mr. Cole, I strongly advise you not to challenge the HOA. It won't go well for you." "The HOA has no jurisdiction here," I said plainly. Bethany took a slow, icy breath, like she was absorbing the insult into her pores. "You'll be hearing from our attorney," she said, snapping the binder shut. "I hope, for your sake, that you become more cooperative." She left with a huff of swirling gravel, and I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, I opened my email and felt my stomach drop. A county inspection request, filed in my name, with my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. The letters were shaped correctly, but lacked the natural pressure, the tiny slant I'd had since high school. Whoever forged it did a decent job, but not good enough to fool anyone who actually knew what my signature looked like. I remembered staring at the screen, hands going cold, thinking, if they're willing to fake this, what else are they willing to fake? That question hung over me now, standing at the gate after Bethany's retreat, the sunrise glowing against the lake like it didn't know a war was brewing. I walked back toward the dock, the HOA sign still planted arrogantly beside it. My fingertips brushed the metal, cold and unfamiliar. Fake paperwork, forged signatures, bogus jurisdiction claims. What Bethany didn't understand was that, of all people, she'd chosen the wrong man to try that with. I'd spent years working as a water rights engineer. My life revolved around permits, hydrological assessments, riparian laws, documentation, and land use statutes so dense most people needed a translator. I didn't love the bureaucracy, but I understood it deeply. And now, someone was trying to rewrite my legal reality like it was a suggestion on a whiteboard. My phone buzzed again. Deputy Lewis. "On my way back. ETA 12 minutes. I looked once more at the sign, then at the empty dirt road where the HOA SUV had disappeared. The wind carried a faint whistle across the water, ruffling the surface into tiny ripples. 4 days ago, Bethany showed up with a binder full of lies. Today she arrived with enforcers and bolt cutters, and she'd promised to come back with proper authority. I didn't know what she had planned next, but I knew one thing as clearly as I knew my own name. This battle wasn't about rules. It was about power. And I wasn't going to let her take mine. The sun had lifted just enough to burn off the morning haze when Deputy Mark Lewis arrived. His county SUV rolled to a stop outside my gate. Lights off. Dust rising around the tires. He stepped out, adjusting his duty belt with a sigh that suggested he'd already dealt with more chaos today than anyone should before breakfast. "Morning, Mr. Cole," he called through the gate. "Morning, Deputy." He glanced around the property, at the lake, the dock, the restoration pumps humming steadily, and then down at the dirt where the HOA sign still stood skewed. His brow creased. "That here when you woke up?" "Wasn't here yesterday," I said. He crouched, inspecting the base of the sign, the disturbed soil, the fresh hammer marks on the pole. "Looks recent. Maybe late last night or early this morning." "Bethany Reed claimed ownership of my lake," I said. "Said I was in violation of HOA rules." He exhaled long through his nose, the way cops do when they wish their job came with a pause button. "We've had run-ins with Ms. Reed before. She can be persistent." "Persistent," I repeated with a dry laugh, "is one word for it." He walked the length of the gate, noting the scuff marks where bolt cutters had nearly been put to use. When he returned, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Off the record," he said. "Don't let them intimidate you. They have zero jurisdiction unless it's defined in your deed, and from what I recall, it isn't." "It's not," I said. He nodded. "Then legally, they don't have a leg to stand on, but they'll push anyway. HOA types like Bethany, they rely on people giving up before things get messy." I knew he was right. They counted on fear, confusion, and exhaustion more than anything written in bylaws. He filled out a preliminary report documenting unauthorized presence, then gave the gate a pat like he was reassuring it. "Call me if they come back," he said, "especially if they threaten forced entry again." "I will." He turned to leave, and I watched the dust trail rise behind him as he drove off. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. The morning tension had broken, but calm didn't quite settle in. Something felt off. This wasn't over. The sign, the binder, the forged inspection request, they were pieces of something larger. And people like Bethany didn't escalate unless they believed they had leverage, or unless they were desperate. When the deputy's SUV finally disappeared down the hill, the property slipped back into its quiet rhythm, the steady hum of the pumps, the distant lap of water against the rocks, the soft creak of wood warming in the sun. I tried to settle into routine, checking equipment, logging the water levels, measuring clarity. Tasks that normally calmed me, but today, they didn't. Something gnawed at me. Not fear exactly, just the uneasy certainty that whatever Bethany was planning wouldn't come through. Official channels. People who forge signatures don't wait patiently for due process. By midday, I pushed aside paperwork and pulled up my security camera system on my tablet. I hadn't checked footage earlier because, frankly, I hadn't expected what I found. I opened the overnight recording from the driveway camera. There, at 2:13 a.m., headlights appeared at the edge of the property. Not drifting by. Not lost. They slowed, turned in, drove right up the private road. My road. I scrubbed the footage back and watched again. Two figures exited a pickup truck. They moved with quiet purpose, careful not to slam the doors. The truck's lights clicked off, leaving only moonlight spilling across the gravel like pale paint. They carried fence posts, cement bags, tools. My chest tightened. They weren't wandering. They were working. On my land. I leaned closer to the screen, watching them dig quickly, measuring the ground, aligning posts, mixing concrete. They weren't amateurs. They knew what they were building. Within 40 minutes, A new barrier stretched across my road, blocking my access to the lake and dock. Exactly the one HOA officers declared restricted access this morning. My jaw clenched. So that was their plan. Create the obstruction, then claim it was theirs. Classic HOA stunt. Manufacture a violation, then punish you for it. The footage continued. At the end, one of the figures wiped sweat from their brow, lifted a phone, checked something, maybe a message, maybe instructions, then nodded to the other. A truck door clicked softly. Headlights flared, and they were gone. I sat back, breath low, heart heavy. The anger that rose wasn't hot. It was cold, focused. The kind of anger that pushes a man to dig deeper instead of lash out. If they were bold enough to install a barrier at 2 in the morning, what else had they done? What else would they try? I set the tablet down, then followed the path toward the lake's edge, scanning the ground with fresh purpose. The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of cold water and damp earth. The sunlight shimmered across the dock boards like polished glass. That's when I saw them. Tire tracks. Not the ones leading up to the barrier. These were deeper, heavier, cutting through the grass toward the shoreline, toward my water control valve. I followed the tracks slowly, each step weighted with the creeping certainty of what I'd find. When I reached the concrete valve housing, the padlock glinted in the light. New, shiny, unfamiliar. I crouched, taking it in. My breath came out shaky. Someone had stood right here. Someone had bent down. Someone had touched what they had no right to touch. And someone had locked me out. I reached for the lock, feeling the cold metal under my fingers, and whispered to myself, this isn't about an HOA dispute anymore. The faint lap of water against the rocks answered me, soft but steady, like the heartbeat of the lake itself. This was sabotage. This was trespassing. This was orchestrated. I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked across the calm water reflecting the sky. Bethany thought this lake belonged to her. She thought the paperwork she fabricated would scare me. She thought her late-night construction stunt would box me in. She thought bolt cutters and loud threats would make me bend. But I wasn't about to bend, and I wasn't about to break. A storm was coming, and she'd lit the first fuse. I stood over the unfamiliar padlock on my water control valve, the metal gleaming with that too new shine that only comes from hardware bought within the last 48 hours. It reflected the pale morning sun like a challenge, like someone had carved a message into the steel. We got here. We touched what you own. We can do it again. Cool wind rolled off the lake, brushing over my hands as I crouched. The water lapped softly behind me, a calm that felt insultingly out of place. My fingers hovered just above the lock, not quite ready to touch it again. Trespassing was one thing. Putting up fake signs was another. But messing with the water infrastructure? That wasn't HOA nonsense anymore. That was dangerous. That was intentional. That was criminal. I straightened slowly, the weight of realization settling into my shoulders. Whoever did this didn't act alone. This wasn't some midnight prank or misunderstanding. Someone planned to sabotage the system controlling the lake's flow, its levels, its environmental stability, the very thing that made restoration possible. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures from every angle. The lock, the tire tracks, the footprints pressed faintly into the mud, the disturbed soil around the hinge access. Document, document, document. Years of engineering work conditioned me to gather evidence first, react second. Once the photos were saved, I stepped a few paces away, letting the cool breeze wrap around me. The lake glittered under the rising sun, its surface broken only by a passing ripple of wind or the quiet splash of a fish below. This was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, It was turning into a battlefield. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. "Sarah Mitchell," came a brisk voice, half alert even this early. "Sarah, it's Remy." There was a brief pause, the subtle shift attorneys make when something serious lands in their lap. "What's wrong?" "You were right," I said. "It's more than paperwork." "What happened?" "They installed a new padlock on my water valve," I said. "Not mine. Clearly placed to block access." Another pause. Longer this time. "Remy," she said calmly, "that's sabotage of a water control device. That's not just unlawful entry. That's potentially a violation of state environmental code. Depending on intent, it could even be criminal interference with a regulated system." I blew out a slow breath. That's what I was afraid of. "Did you touch anything?" "No, I took photos." "Good," she said. "Don't remove it yet. Let the county see it first. You need documentation, chain of custody, the whole deal." I stared out toward the lake as she spoke, watching sunlight glint on the docks in the distance. The small boats tied along the shoreline swayed gently, ignorant of the mess brewing behind the scenes. Sarah continued, her tone sharper now. "This is escalating faster than I expected. 4 days, from fake easement papers to tampering with your valve system? Someone's desperate." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "My thoughts exactly." "I'm going to pull some old HOA filings," she said. "See who authorized what in the past. Patterns, signatures, anything that stands out. If they've tried this before, even on someone else, we'll find it." "Sarah," I said quietly, "thank you." "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You bought that lake legally. You restored it legally. If someone's trying to strip your rights through force or fraud, then the law is on your side, and my job is to make sure they can't twist it." Her confidence grounded me more than she probably realized. "I'll call you back," she said. "Give me a couple hours." As soon as the line clicked off, the stillness of the property settled around me again, layered with a tension I couldn't ignore. I pocketed my phone and began walking the shoreline path that traced the lake, gravel crunching beneath my boots. Every sound felt sharper now. The splash of water against the rocks, the creak of the old wooden pier shifting as it warmed in the sunlight, the faint rustling of leaves as a breeze brushed the hillside. But under all of it was a new undercurrent, something I hadn't felt before today. Vulnerability. For the first time, the lake didn't feel like a retreat. It felt exposed, watched. Vulnerable to people who didn't respect boundaries, laws, or ownership. When I reached the cabin again, the front porch boards gave their familiar groan beneath my weight. I climbed the steps and sank onto the top stair, letting the silence wrap around me. My hands flexed unconsciously, restless, unsettled. My mind replayed the footage from 2:13 a.m. The headlights creeping in, the quiet movement, the purposeful digging. Whoever those figures were, their confidence was chilling. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't worried about being caught, because someone told them they wouldn't be. Someone like Bethany. I rubbed a hand slowly across my face. What was driving her? Why push this hard? Why risk legal consequences? Why risk everything? My phone rang. I answered instantly. "Remy," Sarah said, her voice lower than before. "I found something." "What?" "There were filings 3 years ago. Attempts to expand HOA jurisdiction to properties near the lake. All denied." "Denied by who?" I asked. "County Planning Board," she replied. "They said the HOA had no historical claim, no easement rights, and no authority beyond the designated subdivision." I felt the back of my neck tighten. So she tried and failed. "Yes," Sarah said. "And Remy, one more thing." I waited. There were drafts, unsigned but clearly authored by someone in the HOA. proposing lake access regulations. They weren't legal. They weren't approved. They were never recorded. But someone clearly wanted them to exist. "Sarah," I murmured, "is this what you wanted me to see?" "No," she said softly. "What I wanted you to see is this. One of those drafts mentions future plans requiring control of water systems and shoreline access. And each draft has one thing in common." "What's that?" "A name. Initials. BR. Bethany Reed." I stared out across the water, letting the revelation settle into the deepest part of me. She'd been planning this. She'd wanted the lake long before I bought it, and now that I owned what she believed should be hers, she wasn't going to stop, not until she got it, or until I proved she couldn't. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the day. It carried through every quiet moment. The hum of the pumps, the rustle of wind through the pines, the distant call of a mourning dove across the lake. Everything peaceful felt like a contrast to the growing pressure building under the surface. And then, late that afternoon, a notification blinked across my phone. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Mandatory attendance for all nearby residents." My first instinct was to ignore it. I wasn't part of their HOA. They had no authority over me. But something in the back of my mind, a quiet warning, told me this was exactly the moment Bethany had been preparing for. If she wanted to turn people against me, this was the place she'd do it. I arrived just before sunset. The community hall sat near the highway, a low wooden building with a sagging porch and a gravel lot filled with pickups and SUVs. A handmade banner hung above the entrance. "Protect our community, safety first." The words were benign, but the intent behind them, I could feel it from the parking lot. Inside, the room buzzed with conversation. Folding chairs lined the center, facing a projector screen already glowing with a map of the lake, my lake, outlined in thick red ink. People glanced at me when I walked in. Some nodded politely. Others whispered to each other, expressions tightening. Word had spread. It always did when someone challenged a person like Bethany. She stood at the front of the room, immaculate as ever in her bright pink blazer, flipping through her notes like she'd been waiting her whole life to deliver this speech. Beside her, 2 HOA board members arranged paperwork. On her other side stood a tall man I didn't recognize, arms folded, eyes locked on me as though evaluating a threat. I took a seat near the aisle. Not too close, not too far, just enough distance to see everything. The chatter faded when Bethany cleared her throat dramatically. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice smooth and rehearsed. "We're here tonight because our community's safety, stability, and environmental well-being are at risk." Her tone dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "Because of one man." A slow ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. I didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't blink. She clicked the projector remote. The map zoomed closer. My lake glowed in alarming shades of red and orange, like a heat map showing imminent danger. "As many of you know," she continued, "Mr. Cole has been conducting unapproved modifications to the lake." Several heads turned toward me. I felt heat climb into my chest. Unapproved? It took everything in me not to stand and shout the truth, that I had a dozen permits, inspections, environmental assessments, every piece of paperwork required by state law. But this wasn't a courtroom. This was a performance. Bethany clicked to the next slide. An exaggerated flood diagram, water levels drawn in, towering blue waves threatening nearby homes. "If these alterations fail," she said gravely, "the lake could overflow into residential zones. Homes may flood. Foundations could crack. Wildlife could be affected. Children could be at risk. And who will be held responsible?" Her eyes landed on me. "Certainly not the HOA, since he refuses to comply with our regulations." Murmurs grew louder. People shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the second row leaned toward her husband, whispering with worry etched on her face. I raised my hand slightly. "Bethany," I said calmly, "none of this is accurate." She held up a hand, silencing me like a teacher scolding a misbehaving student. "You will have a chance to speak after we present the full scope of the issue." The tall man beside her, likely some HOA security contractor, glared at me as though daring me to try again. Bethany clicked to another slide. Grainy photos of machinery, my machinery, taken from angles that framed them as suspicious. "These pumps were installed without community oversight," she said, "and without environmental review." That was a lie so blatant it almost made me laugh. She didn't stop there. She launched into charts, diagrams, claims about erosion risk, soil instability, even potential chemical contamination, all fabricated, all dramatic, all designed to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who didn't understand hydrology, engineering, or basic regulatory processes. And judging by the faces in the room, most didn't. The fear was working. When she finally paused for breath, she swept her gaze across the room like a queen awaiting applause. "Now," she said, folding her hands, "if anyone has questions, I'll be happy to clarify." A man in a flannel jacket stood. "Did he get any approval for this? Any at all?" Bethany's voice softened, dripping with false empathy. "That's the issue. He claims he did, but he has refused to provide documentation to the HOA. We can only assume that if he won't show us proof, it must not exist." Every eye in the room snapped to me. The twisting in my chest sharpened. She was good, deceptive, manipulative, but undeniably skilled at shaping perception. I stood slowly. "I have every permit required by the state," I said clearly. "Environmental, hydrological, structural, you name it. This project was legally approved and fully reviewed by professionals. Nothing I've done has violated any regulation." Bethany gave a sad smile, the kind you reserve for someone you believe is lying to themselves. "Remy," she said, "if that were true, then why not submit those documents to the HOA for verification?" "Because you don't have jurisdiction," I said evenly. The room erupted with murmurs again. Several board members exchanged looks. One elderly man shook his head as though disappointed in me personally. Bethany pounced on it. "Exactly, everyone. This is why we must intervene. For safety. For transparency. For protection." A hand touched my elbow. I turned slightly. A neighbor, a quiet woman I'd only met once, slipped a folded note into my palm without a word. Her expression flickered with guilt and urgency. I lowered my eyes to the paper and discreetly opened it. 5 words stared back at me. Check HOA finances. Something's wrong. My heart thudded once, heavy and certain. So this wasn't just about control. It wasn't just about power. There was something underneath, something they were hiding. When I looked up again, Bethany was already addressing the room, cementing her narrative, building momentum, tightening the noose of perception around me. But the fear I felt earlier had shifted. It wasn't dread now. It was clarity. Because for the first time, I knew something she didn't. I had just been handed the thread that might unravel everything she'd built. The emergency meeting stretched another half hour, mostly Bethany pacing, presenting, and performing. By the time the board adjourned, the room buzzed with unease and half-truths. People avoided meeting my eyes, some out of confusion, others out of fear of being seen standing near the supposed cause of danger. I slipped out quietly, the folded note pressed in my jacket pocket, like a key I didn't yet know how to use. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped into the evening air. The sky was streaked orange and purple, the last of the sun reflecting faintly on the tops of parked trucks. My truck sat at the edge of the lot, half covered in dust from the highway. As I reached it, a voice called softly from the shadows. "Mr. Cole?" I turned. The woman who slipped me the note stood by the building's corner, arms crossed, shoulders tight, as if bracing herself against a cold wind that wasn't really there. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping closer. "I couldn't say more inside. Bethany, she has people watching." "I appreciate what you did," I said. "What made you warn me?" She hesitated, chewing her lip. "My husband used to serve on the HOA board. He resigned last year after raising concerns about maintenance spending, money going places it shouldn't, vendors that didn't exist, invoices that didn't match work done." Her voice dropped. "They pressured him, tried to silence him." "And Bethany was behind it?" I asked. Her eyes dimmed. "Everything goes through her." She pressed her hands together, worry flickering across her features. "Be careful, Mr. Cole. She doesn't just bend rules, she breaks them." Then she slipped back toward the parking lot before anyone could see her. I stood for a moment, the weight of her words settling like cold iron in my chest. Financial misconduct, false vendors, hidden spending. If this was true, everything I'd seen, the fake papers, the forged inspection request, the midnight barrier, was part of a larger scheme, and Bethany couldn't afford for anyone to uncover it. I climbed into my truck, pulled out my phone, and sent one text. "Remy, need your help. HOA finances. Tonight? Rebecca. Come to my office. Door will be open." Rebecca Shaw, a CPA who understood numbers the way I understood water systems. Quiet, sharp, and impossible to mislead. If anyone could trace the financial roots of this mess, it was her. By the time I reached her small office near Town Square, the sky had turned dark. Street lamps glowed amber along the sidewalk, moths spiraling lazily around them. A neon sign buzzed in the window. Shaw Accounting Services. Honest, accurate, trusted. Inside, Rebecca sat at her desk with a stack of printed HOA records in front of her. She gave me a small nod as I entered. "Close the door," she said. I did. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, eyes never leaving the papers spread around her like pieces of a puzzle. "Whoever gave you that note did you a favor?" she said. "I've been looking at the HOA filings for the past 2 hours. They're strange." "Strange how?" She pointed at a column of outgoing payments. "These vendor names? They don't exist. I checked business registries, tax IDs, everything. Blank." "And the amounts?" I asked. "Too round," she said. "Too evenly spaced. No legitimate contractor charges identical amounts every month." I leaned over the desk. "So she's funneling money." "More than that," Rebecca said. "She's hiding it, masking it with fake lake maintenance and shoreline management fees, all things she can claim are necessary because of your restoration work." I felt a low pulse of anger tighten in my chest. "So I'm her excuse, her smokescreen." Rebecca nodded grimly. "Exactly." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the desk. I flipped it over. A voicemail alert from one of my engineering clients. I pressed play. "Hi, Remy. I hate to bring this up, but someone called me today. A woman. Said you were under investigation for reckless environmental activity. Suggested I reconsider working with you until things were sorted out. I don't want issues on my project. Let's pause for now." The voicemail ended. I stared at the phone, jaw tight. "That was Bethany," Rebecca said quietly. "Or someone working for her." "This is a smear campaign," I muttered. "She's trying to wreck my livelihood." "How many calls like that have you gotten?" she asked. "3 today," I said. "2 more yesterday." Rebecca exhaled sharply. "She's desperate, and desperate people get sloppy." She turned back to her computer and pulled up a document. "Look at this," she said, highlighting a line item. "These invoices, marked paid, are tied to a company registered last month. No website, no physical address. And guess who signed the authorization?" "Bethany," I said. "Bethany," she confirmed. The tension in my shoulders grew heavier. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a cover operation, a siphon, a financial machine Bethany had built, and one my presence threatened to expose. I dragged a hand over my face. "What can we do?" Rebecca leaned back, her expression sharpening into something fierce. "We keep digging. We follow the money. And if she's been embezzling, we prove it." The determination in her voice grounded me, gave me direction, purpose. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Mr. Cole. Some things aren't worth losing your lake over." A cold chill crawled along my spine. Rebecca saw the look on my face. "What is it?" I handed her the phone. She read the message, then whispered, "She's watching you." I took my phone back, locked the screen, and let the silence settle. It wasn't fear I felt now. It was controlled fury. Because Bethany wasn't just attacking my property. She was attacking my reputation, my career, my integrity. And she thought no one could stop her. Rebecca began sorting documents again. "I need one more night to cross-reference everything," she said. "Tomorrow morning you'll have a clearer picture." I stood ready to leave, but she caught my arm gently. "Be careful, Remy," she said. "When people like Bethany feel the walls closing in, they don't go quietly." I nodded, stepping out into the cool night. The air smelled like rain and dust. A distant rumble of thunder echoed across the hills. The storm I'd felt forming earlier was no longer metaphorical. It was rolling in. By the time I reached my truck, clouds had swallowed the moon, leaving only the dim halo of street lamps to light the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I drove home with the windows cracked, the wind whipping occasionally through, bringing the metallic scent of an approaching storm. Every mile felt heavier than the last, like the night itself was warning me to brace for what was coming. When I reached the cabin, the lake looked different, darker, the surface rippled by a wind that didn't exist earlier. My property lights cast faint pools across the gravel driveway. I was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't settle. Not with what I'd learned. Not with what Rebecca hinted at. My phone buzzed just as I stepped inside. A message from her. "Working late? Found something big. We'll call you in the morning." R. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Something big. I didn't know it yet, but big wasn't even close to describing what she found. Sleep came slow, restless, fragmented. Each time I drifted off, my mind replayed fragments. The HOA sign, Bethany's voice slicing through the iron gate, the padlock, the headlights at 2:13 a.m. Every piece pointed toward a plan larger than territorial arrogance. When dawn finally pushed through the curtains, the lake was calm again, the kind of calm that felt almost staged, like nature was pretending nothing had happened. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the cabin, but the moment I lifted the mug, my phone rang. "Rebecca." I answered immediately. "Morning." Her voice was tight, urgent. "Remy, you need to come to my office. Now." My stomach clenched. "Is everything okay?" "No," she said, "and that's why you need to get here." The drive back into town felt longer than usual. It wasn't traffic. It wasn't distance. It was dread, sitting heavy on my chest like a weight I couldn't shift. I parked hurriedly and walked up the steps into her office. She was standing by her desk, arms folded, staring at her computer screen like it had personally betrayed her. "What is it?" I asked. She motioned for me to come closer. On the screen was an email chain, enlarged at 150% zoom. At the top was a header. Subject, Proposed Marina Lease Agreement. Annual revenue, $30,000. A cold shock rippled through me. "Remy," she said quietly, "this email is from 6 months before you bought the lake." My throat tightened. 6 months, I repeated. "So, before ownership changed." "Right," she said. Bethany was negotiating a commercial marina lease, one that required HOA control of the lake. I leaned closer, scanning the thread. My pulse thumped harder with each line. Email from Bethany Reed. Email to West Shore Marina Development Group. "I can secure the lake. The current ownership situation is temporary." I exhaled, long and shaky. "She promised them access she didn't have," Rebecca continued. "And when you bought the lake with full, legalized water rights, that deal collapsed." Suddenly everything snapped into place. The fake easement, the forged inspection request, the midnight barrier, the smear campaign, the valve tampering. "She's trying to salvage her deal," I said. "She needs the lake under HOA jurisdiction. That's why she's escalating." Rebecca nodded. "Exactly. This was never about community safety or environmental concerns. It was about money, steady, guaranteed revenue. And from what I can tell, she's in financial trouble." I felt my jaw clench. "How bad?" Rebecca clicked another folder open. Scanned expenses, duplicate transfers, invoices for services never rendered. "Bad enough," she said, "that she's been using HOA funds to cover personal debts. These shell companies? They're not just suspicious, they look like fronts. She's been routing money to hide losses." I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "And if she doesn't deliver the lake?" "She loses the marina deal. The HOA loses the revenue she probably promised them. Her financial misconduct becomes impossible to hide." I blew out a slow breath. "So that's her motive." "No question," Rebecca said. Before I could speak again, her computer chimed. Another email. From the same marina developer. To Bethany Reed. "If you can't secure the lake soon, we will pursue other legal options." The words felt like a punch. "Legal options," I muttered, meaning forcing her hand. "Meaning she'll try anything," Rebecca replied. I sank into the chair opposite her desk, staring at the documents scattered around us. The pages felt like puzzle pieces that, when arranged correctly, exposed a much bigger picture, a picture of corruption, manipulation, lies, and desperation. Rebecca crossed her arms again. "Remy, you need to protect yourself. This isn't just an HOA president who wants control. This is a person fighting to keep herself afloat. And she's willing to steal a lake to do it," I said darkly. The quiet hum of the office filled the silence that followed. Outside, the wind rattled the window slightly, a subtle reminder of the storm building beyond the walls. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Rebecca," I said, "can you compile these into an evidence package?" She nodded. "Already started." "And Sarah?" "She should look at these immediately." I stood, feeling the shift, the moment the target stopped running and started fighting. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Rebecca closed her laptop gently, her expression steady but concerned. "You should know, Remy," she said softly. "Once we expose this, Bethany won't just fight back. She'll panic." I nodded slowly. "I'm counting on it." When I stepped out of her office, the late morning sun had broken through the storm clouds, scattering light across the sidewalk in a way that felt almost symbolic. Brief clarity before everything turned dark again. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air cool the tension tightening across my chest. But clarity didn't last long. By the time I made the drive back to the lake, a beige state vehicle was parked at the bottom of my driveway. The seal on the door read, Department of Environmental Quality, Water Assessment Division. I recognized the logo immediately. My heart gave a thump, not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that things had escalated into official territory. A woman in field boots and a light windbreaker stood near the shoreline, her clipboard balanced on one arm, her posture poised and professional. She turned as I approached, offering a polite but firm nod. Mr. Cole? That's me. Patricia Williams, she said, State Environmental Inspector. We received a formal complaint regarding unauthorized lake modification and potential ecological risk. Of course they had. Bethany's fingerprints were all over this. I assume you're here because of the HOA, I said. I'm here because of the complaint, she corrected, though her eyes held a flicker that suggested she understood the situation more than she verbalized. Well, I said, I have all permits on file. Good, she replied. But we still need to assess the site to close the complaint. She motioned toward the dock and shoreline. Walk me through the restoration. As we moved along the lake's edge, I described every step I'd taken. Sediment removal, aeration installation, contour grading to prevent erosion, shore planting, and valve calibration. Patricia took notes, pausing occasionally to test water samples or photograph structural elements. After 20 minutes, she lowered her clipboard. Your setup is clean, she said. Very clean. Most private restoration projects I visit cut corners. Yours doesn't show any red flags so far. Appreciate that, I said. I tried to do everything by the book. That's obvious. She crouched, dipping a small meter into the water. Your dissolved oxygen levels are excellent. Biodiversity looks strong. No signs of contamination. I felt a small wave of relief, subtle but grounding. Patricia walked toward the pumps next, jotting more notes. Frankly, Mr. Cole, this is one of the best-managed private lakes I've assessed in the last decade. Wish the HOA saw it that way. She gave a slight smirk. I've seen my share of HOA disputes. Most of them involve someone with a little power trying to feel like they have more. Before I could respond, a car door slammed near the gate. A bright pink figure marched down the gravel drive like a general storming the front lines. Bethany Reed. Right behind her were 2 board members and a man, carrying a briefcase. He looked uncomfortable in his rumpled suit, but he adjusted his tie as if it could compensate for whatever he lacked in credibility. Patricia exhaled quietly. Let me guess, that's the HOA. That's the Queen herself, I muttered. Bethany approached without slowing down. Inspector Williams, thank goodness you're here. We were worried you'd arrive before we could provide expert testimony. Patricia raised a brow. Expert testimony? Yes, of course. Bethany gestured sharply to the man beside her. This is Dr. Gerald Winters, an environmental consultant with more than 20 years of experience. The man stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly. Yes, good to meet you. I've conducted my own preliminary assessment and found significant concerns. Patricia's tone cooled instantly. What concerns? Winters opened his briefcase and produced a printed report. His hands shook slightly. Erosion risk, chemical disturbance, unstable sediment layers. I watched Patricia's eyes scan the document. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture did. She held the paper up to the light, examining it as though it might disintegrate under scrutiny. What agency are you affiliated with, Dr. Winters? She asked. He blinked. Agency? I'm an independent consultant. Accredited through which organization? Well, I studied environmental science at Westfield University. Patricia looked up sharply. Westfield University closed in 2003, she said flatly. It was never accredited for environmental programs. A beat of silence. Bethany's face drained of color. Winters stammered. There must be some mistake. Maybe the— No mistake, Patricia said. She turned to Bethany. Hiring a consultant with fabricated credentials to influence a state investigation is a serious offense. Bethany stiffened. He was recommended to us. By whom? Patricia asked. No answer. The inspector continued, her tone now edged with steel. Furthermore, this report lacks methodological structure, regulatory citations, or measurable data. It is worthless. Winters wilted under the blunt assessment, clutching his briefcase like a shield. Patricia handed the report back to him. You should leave. He didn't argue. He didn't even pretend to. He practically jogged up the driveway without looking back, his briefcase swinging wildly as he fled. Patricia turned to Bethany, voice low and cutting. You attempted to mislead a regulatory assessment. That is unacceptable. Bethany opened her mouth, closed it, then forced out, We were acting in the community's best interest. The community, Patricia said, is harmed when false evidence is introduced, and when legal property owners are harassed. Bethany shot me a look that could have blistered paint. Patricia resumed her inspection, leaving Bethany and her entourage standing awkwardly by the shoreline. After another hour of assessments, soil, water, plant life, Patricia closed her notebook. Mr. Cole, she said, my preliminary findings show no violations. Your restoration complies with state law and best environmental practices. Relief washed through me, but it didn't settle long. Additionally, she said, lowering her voice, I will be noting the HOA's attempt to interfere with this investigation. That will trigger additional review. Good, I said. She handed me a copy of her preliminary summary. Keep this. You may need it. As she headed to her vehicle, Bethany approached me, fists clenched at her sides. You think you've won something today, she hissed. I think I proved the truth, I replied. Her eyes flickered with something dangerous. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. Panic. Real panic. She turned sharply and marched away without another word. I didn't know what message she'd received, but judging by the look on her face, whatever was coming next wasn't going to be subtle. I found out 2 days later, just after sunrise, when my phone buzzed with a call from County Surveyor James Mitchell. His tone was clipped, urgent, so unlike the steady, unbothered man I'd known during my restoration process. Remy, we've got a situation, he said without preamble. There's been a petition filed against your property. A hearing has been scheduled. They're challenging your ownership of the lake. My chest tightened. Who filed it? There was a pause so long I could hear papers rustling on his end. Bethany Reed, through the HOA. They're claiming decades of community stewardship and historical possession, and they're pushing it fast. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Of course they are, James continued. The judge assigned is Administrative Law Judge Margaret Hartwell. Tough, no nonsense. She won't tolerate drama, but she will expect evidence, all of it. I have evidence, I said. Plenty. You're going to need all of it, he said. Bring boxes. When the call ended, the cabin felt unnervingly quiet, as though the lake and the hills were holding their breath with me. Sunlight crept across the floorboards, warm but thin. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle. The forged papers, the sabotage, the smear campaign, the false expert, the marina deal, and now a legal attack. I reached for the growing stack of binders on my kitchen table. Environmental reports, permitted restoration plans, title documents, survey logs, photos of trespassing, camera footage timestamps, Rebecca's financial breakdown. Piece by piece, I packed them into boxes until they lined the entryway like soldiers ready for battle. On the morning of the hearing, the county building buzzed with a type of tension I recognized instantly, the kind people feel when they expect a spectacle. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Pickup trucks and sedans spilled into the overflow gravel. Folks stood near the entrance, whispering, glancing at me as I passed. Inside the hearing room, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Pale gray walls, a long table at the front where the judge would sit. Rows of chairs facing forward, a worn American flag in the corner. Bethany was already there. Pink suit, perfect hair, fake calm. Sitting beside her was an attorney I hadn't seen before, a sharp-eyed woman with crisp papers and a demeanor that suggested she enjoyed knife fights in courtrooms. Behind them, HOA members filled the seats like a supporting choir. A few shot me hostile looks. Others just looked confused, unsure what they'd signed up for. Across the room, my allies sat. Deputy Lewis, Rebecca Shaw, Surveyor James Mitchell, and Patricia Williams, the environmental inspector, her clipboard balanced neatly on her lap. I took a seat at my table, resting one hand on the topmost binder. The cool surface steadied me. When the judge entered, the room shifted into silence. Judge Hartwell's presence filled the space. Not loud, not imposing, just immovable. Steel gray hair pulled back, eyes sharp enough to cut paper. She scanned the docket. This is a property jurisdiction hearing regarding the lake known as Coal Lake. Petitioner, Lakeshore HOA, represented by Ms. Bethany Reed. Respondent, Mr. Remy Cole. Her gaze lifted. Let's begin. Bethany's attorney rose first. Your Honor, this case concerns a lake historically used, maintained, and governed by the Lakeshore community for decades. The HOA has invested in its infrastructure, overseen its access, and provided upkeep. Mr. Cole's sudden claim to exclusive ownership contradicts long-standing community rights and threatens neighborhood stability. She gestured to a binder. We will prove continuous community use and the HOA's rightful authority. The judge nodded. Proceed. They presented photos of the old valve modifications, notes from informal meetings years ago, logs of volunteer cleanup events, statements from long-term residents claiming they'd always considered the lake part of the neighborhood. On the surface, it was compelling. On the surface. When they finished, Judge Hartwell turned toward me. Mr. Cole, your response? I stood, steadying myself with a breath. Your Honor, I have a recorded deed that shows I own the lake and surrounding land outright. No easements, no shared rights, no conditions. I purchased it legally after a complete title search and environmental clearance. I handed the deed to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. This document, I continued, is the only legally binding authority over the lake. The judge studied it for a moment. Properly recorded, she said. Chain of title is clean. Bethany's attorney jumped up. But the infrastructure, that proves possession. I turned to James. He took the stand and testified clearly. The 1990s valve modifications were unauthorized, not approved by the county, not permitted, not documented. Illegal, in fact. Installing unauthorized structures, he finished, does not grant ownership. It violates it. The judge nodded once, writing something down. Next, Deputy Lewis approached the stand. He presented his report. The roadblock, the concrete posts, the trespassing, the unauthorized lock on the water valve. Your Honor, he said, these actions were undertaken by HOA members. None had legal right to construct anything on Mr. Cole's property. Murmurs spread through the room. Bethany's attorney objected, but the judge held up a hand. Overruled. Continue. Then came Rebecca. She stepped forward with a calm that cracked the tension like a hammer on ice. I conducted a forensic review of HOA finances, she said. There are irregular payments to shell companies, unauthorized expenditures, and evidence suggesting attempts to secure revenue from a commercial marina deal. She held up the printed emails. This agreement, she said, was negotiated by Ms. Reed before Mr. Cole ever bought the lake. It required HOA control. When Mr. Cole's legitimate purchase disrupted the plan, Ms. Reed attempted to reclaim control by force, fraud, and manipulation. A gasp rippled across the room. Bethany's face drained of color. The attorney sputtered objections. Irrelevant! Character assassination! No proven connection! Rebecca calmly tapped the paper. Her signature is on every authorization. Judge Hartwell's eyes narrowed. Ms. Reed, is this true? Bethany's lips trembled, but she stayed silent. Finally, Patricia Williams approached the stand. She issued her environmental findings with the precision of a scalpel. Mr. Cole's restoration was exemplary, state-approved, compliant with every regulation. And, she added, turning slightly toward the HOA's table, an attempt was made to influence my investigation using a consultant with fabricated credentials. That is currently under review. The room froze. Judge Hartwell leaned back, closing the file. I've seen enough. Everyone straightened. Ms. Reed, she said, voice firm. Your petition is denied. The HOA has no jurisdiction, no historical claim that meets legal standards, and no authority to regulate Mr. Cole's property. Bethany's attorney shot up. Your Honor. Sit down, the judge snapped. She turned to the clerk. Prepare an order barring the HOA and Ms. Reed from contacting or interfering with Mr. Cole or his property. Refer all evidence of fraud, unauthorized activity, and financial misconduct to the district attorney's office. Her gavel struck once, echoing off the walls like thunder. Court is adjourned. In the stunned silence that followed, I gathered my binders slowly, letting the moment wash over me. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release, from vindication. When I stepped out into the hallway, people were waiting. Half the community, it seemed, some with guilt in their eyes, some with relief, some with awe. A few stepped aside to let me pass. Others whispered, "Good job," or "Sorry we didn't know." I didn't say anything at first. I just breathed. For the first time in weeks, the storm inside me had broken. But outside, the real storm was only beginning for Bethany Reed. 3 weeks passed before I saw the full aftermath of the hearing. Those days were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced since moving out to the lake. Quiet enough that the creak of my cabin steps, the soft hum of the aeration system, and the gentle slap of water against the dock felt amplified, almost sacred. The lake shimmered more peacefully than ever, as if it too sensed the weight that had lifted. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, a familiar car pulled into the gravel turnout. Mrs. Henderson stepped out, waving, and behind her came another car, then another. I stood, uncertain, as nearly a dozen HOA residents approached, some with hesitant smiles, others looking at the ground like they were arriving at a funeral rather than someone's porch. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak. "We wanted to talk to you," she said. Her voice was gentle, apologetic. A woman I recognized from the back row of the HOA meetings stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "I'm Sandra Mitchell. I was one of the people who believed everything Bethany said." She swallowed. "I voted for her initiatives. I supported her actions. And I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word. Others nodded along. A man in a work jacket stepped forward. "We trusted her, thought she was doing right by the neighborhood. We didn't question the things she claimed about you." I studied their faces. There was no falsehood, no rehearsed tone, just weary people realizing they'd been used. "It's all right," I said quietly. "You didn't know." Sandra shook her head. We should have. We should have asked questions. But Bethany, she made us feel like not trusting her meant not supporting the community." Rebecca and Mrs. Henderson exchanged a knowing glance. They'd seen it long before anyone else had. Rebecca cleared her throat. "There's more," she said. "The fraud investigation is complete." I braced myself. Bethany diverted nearly $47,000 in HOA funds over 3 years, Rebecca said. The district attorney filed charges: embezzlement, falsifying documents, misuse of organizational authority. A hush fell over the crowd. "And," Mrs. Henderson added, "her real estate license has been suspended." The news didn't spark triumph in me, not the way I might have imagined weeks ago. Instead, it settled in my chest with a quiet, resolute heaviness. She had done wrong, but she hadn't been the only one affected. Residents had lost money, trust, stability. The community had been fractured from the inside. I exhaled. "She hurt a lot of people." Sandra nodded painfully. "We want to make things right. The HOA is restructuring the board entirely. We're implementing new oversight, new transparency rules, no more single-signature spending." She looked me straight in the eye. "And we're sending letters to your clients, the ones she contacted. We're explaining the truth. You shouldn't have to fix the damage she caused alone." A weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying loosened just a little. "Thank you," I said softly. After the group left, quiet, relieved, humbled, Rebecca lingered. She stood next to me on the dock, watching sunlight ripple across the water. "There's something else, Mom," she said. I glanced at her. "More?" "The district attorney would like you to testify," she said. "The prosecution needs your account of the harassment and financial damage to establish a clear pattern." I nodded without hesitation. "I'll do it." "You don't have to," she added. "They have enough evidence." "I know." I looked out across the lake. "But I'm not doing it because they need me to. I'm doing it so she can't do this to anyone else." Rebecca smiled, small, proud. "I figured that would be your answer." A month later, I found myself in a different courtroom, this time as a witness in Bethany's sentencing hearing. The room was packed. HOA members filled several rows, looking stunned, remorseful, or both. Bethany sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The bright pink suits were gone. Her hair was pulled back tightly, as if she were holding herself together by sheer force of will. The prosecutor outlined her actions crisply. The embezzlement, the fraudulent filings, the misuse of HOA funds, the harassment campaign, the attempt to steal property through deception. Bethany's attorney cited financial stress, personal struggles, even community pressure, but the judge wasn't swayed. "Ms. Reed," he said, "you held a position of trust. Instead, you abused that trust to advance personal financial interests and to harm an innocent property owner. These actions were not impulsive. They were calculated, repeated, and deliberate." Her sentence was handed down. 3 years probation, $45,000 in restitution, mandatory community service, permanent removal from any HOA leadership roles, revocation of her real estate license. Not prison, but justice. As she was escorted out, she didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, the same way people do when the world they built has collapsed around them and they can't bear to see the ruins. 2 months later, life finally felt like mine again. One morning, I received a call from the Regional Water Rights Association. The representative's voice was cheerful, formal. Mr. Cole, your case has become somewhat of a benchmark, a clear example of lawful property protection and documentation discipline. We'd love to have you speak at our annual conference. I almost laughed from disbelief. You want me to teach? In a sense, he said. Your experience could help a lot of people. I agreed. At the conference, standing before a room full of engineers, landowners, attorneys, and environmental officials, I told my Keipayu story. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Truth. Gratitude. Afterward, dozens of people approached to share their own struggles, disputes, false claims, overreach. Some thanked me for giving them courage to stand firm. It felt meaningful, worth something. Back at the lake, restoration tours became a small community program. Local schools brought students to study water ecology. Kayakers glided through the clear water. Fishermen returned, amazed at the biodiversity that had rebounded. One afternoon, guiding a group of students along the dock, I noticed something near the old access road where the illegal barrier once stood. Wildflowers. Dozens of them blooming where concrete posts had been ripped from the earth. Nature reclaiming its peace. Later that evening, I installed a small wooden sign at the entrance. The letters were hand-carved, simple, honest. Lawfully protected waters. Community education site visitors welcome. Because the answer to someone trying to take what's yours isn't always to build higher walls. Sometimes it's opening the gate, on your terms. At sunset, I sat at the end of the dock, legs dangling above the water. The sky painted orange and gold. The lake reflected it back like a mirror. My lake. My peace. Hard won. Protected. Not just by law, but by truth. When the last bit of sunlight dipped behind the hills, I found myself whispering, when you know your rights, and you have evidence, no intimidation can move you. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it without a shadow of fear. If this story hit home for you, drop a simple yes in the comments, or a justice if you've ever had to stand your ground against someone who pushed too far. Remember, sometimes the quiet courage to protect what's yours is what keeps our communities honest. And if you'd like more real stories about land, dignity, and the fights we don't back down from, go ahead and subscribe. I'd love to have you here for the next one.